Okay, I'll do the boring housekeeping stuff as everyone's coming in here. So my name is Haley Carlson. I am the manager of the Integrated Modeling Program for Canada. And we are a program running out of the Global Water Futures program, which is a University of Saskatchewan-led research program funded in part by the Canada First Research Excellence Fund. IMPC, as we are known by as a short name, is a large research program. We're building integrated modeling capability in major basins across Canada. And our intercomparison work, which you'll hear about today, is led by Drs. Brian Tolson and Juliane Mai from the University of Waterloo. And before I hand things off to Julie, I just wanted to note a few housekeeping things. So the webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website after at gwf.uscask.ca/IMPC. And for those of you who are at our annual meeting, it really will be recorded this time. We lost a couple of recordings at our annual meeting, but we have ensured that will not happen this time. And then you can type any questions at any time during the presentation into either the chat or the question and answer panel on the bottom of the screen. I'm sure everyone is familiar with Zoom at this point in a global pandemic, but if you're not, you can just hover your mouse over the bottom of the panel and the little chat or Q&A boxes will pop up. I will be addressing these questions to Julie and Brian after the presentation is complete. And finally note that as a participant in the webinar, you won't be able to see other people in the room, but there are other people in the room, you just can't see them. And so with that, I will hand it off to Julie.
Thanks, Haley. Let me just see if I can change my slides here. Yeah. Thanks, Haley. Before I'm gonna get started here, I want to acknowledge that we are participating today from the traditional territories of the First People across the country. Here in Kitchener-Waterloo, I acknowledge that I'm on the Haldimand Tract, land that was promised to the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations of the Grand River. The Haldimand Tract is within the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people. I would encourage you to take a moment to recognize the traditional land where you are. With that, I would like to get started and welcome you to the webinar of today about model intercomparison studies over the Great Lakes. And I would like to acknowledge my amazing team I'm honored to work together with. It grew quite a bit over the last years. And I'm really happy to have them all on board. It's a very lively team, very interactive, and all this work I'm presenting today wouldn't be possible without them. So with that, I would like to get started, and I think the audience today is quite diverse, so I would really like to start from the beginning and start with the question, why are we actually doing model intercomparison studies in general, for the people who might not actually know what that is. So when we go outside, so I go outside quite a bit, you see water in very different states throughout the environment. It could be that they are it's quite natural environments, or that the environment is more snow and ice driven, so you have processes that are snow and ice related. You might have mountain hydrology where the water is used to provide energy, or is for energy production. You might have urban environments where completely different processes are important, or you have to consider. You might be in the prairies where you have like potholes, which have different, which work different than, for example, in an urban environment. So because of that, we are trying to build models to represent all that, such that we can, for example, use those models in operational forecasting of, for example, water levels, evaluating impacts of climate change, or use those models for reservoir management. So because of all these different environments we see out there, there's different models built for different purposes, right? So there's models that focus on mountain hydrology, and then there's models that work more for urban areas. But once you get used to one model and you just want to model a different environment, you will likely not change your model, but you would start implementing new features in your model to accommodate also the changes in your environment. So all these models that have initially been built for a certain environment grow over time. They get more complex. Only a few people know all the different specifics of every model. So it's becoming really difficult to make a decision which model is actually the best for which environment, because they have quite an overlap and they are all very special in different aspects. So that's why model intercomparison studies become very handy. They are massive undertakings because all these models are so complicated. You usually need an expert in setting up those models. So these studies usually run a really long time. They involve a lot of people. That's why on my initial slide, there were so many names, because we have so many different models in this study. The questions you would usually answer with a model intercomparison study, and here's only 4 example ones. There are certainly way more, but it's just the 4 most obvious ones, I think. A model intercomparison study, for example, would be set up to find a model that is most suitable for a certain domain. So you have a new region, you don't know which model you want to use, you just set up several ones and just look which one is best. So there have been a lot of studies out there. Here's just 3 example ones. You could also try and test new types of models. So there's this whole machine learning models popping up, and you would just like to try to set up your original model and then set up also a few machine learning models, just seeing if they perform better, where are they better, why are they better. This is technically also a model intercomparison study. But also, as I said, since it's such a big and long undertaking of like setting up complex models over a certain domain, it's certainly also to exchange knowledge and experience of people, because all these people have to work together for years. So they exchange, what are you doing if there is a lake in the middle of your catchment? What are you doing if you have this and that land use change over the years in your model? So they need to talk to each other. So it's certainly also a platform for exchanging experience. And then there has been just recently a study by Bernard where they actually they set up model intercomparison studies based on snow. So it was mostly snow models. And they found that even if you have exactly the same model, you have exactly the same data, but it's 2 different people setting up that model, the skill of the model or the performance of the model changes. So it's also the human impact on those model setups. So that's certainly something interesting to look at. So it depends on how much patience a modeler has in setting up their model. So the model performance might change over time. So the outline of this talk today is basically 2 studies. They are both GRIP studies. GRIP stands for Great Lakes Runoff Intercomparison Project. And there has been 2 before we started with Lake Erie. There was one study that was for Lake Michigan. And then there was a second study over Lake Ontario. And then we came on board and we said, okay, we are gonna do Lake Erie, the Lake Erie study, which is about 100,000 square kilometers in size. We included Lake St. Clair because it's connected to Lake Erie. So we started with that and we learned a lot of things in the last 2 years. The study is basically finished. And then instead of setting up now a GRIP study for Lake Huron and then Lake Superior, we decided let's just do the whole domain at once. So we moved from GRIP E, from Lake Erie to the Great Lakes directly, which is now about 1 million square kilometers in size, which is like a massive domain or a massive undertaking itself. So we try to apply all the things we have learned during GRIP E and try to change a little bit the setup of the Great Lakes study. But I will talk about that like in the second half of the presentation. So why are we doing Lake Erie and the Great Lakes? I think the reason why one would model the Great Lakes is pretty obvious. There's just a lot of people living there in the US, in Canada. It's the world's largest surface freshwater reservoir by area. In the Lake Erie watershed itself, there live like more than 1/3 of the people of the entire Great Lakes are living in the Lake Erie watershed. So because it is so densely populated, it leads to significant problems in that area. So for example, you probably have seen pictures like this left one here, when in summer, the algae blooms in Lake Erie are so heavy that you basically cannot drink that water anymore. You cannot go swimming in there. It's toxic concentrations in there. It's because the lake is very shallow. It gets really warm. All the urban and agricultural runoff that is dumped into that lake or ends up in that lake is leading to all these problems. So there's massive overfishing in Lake Erie. We have record high water levels, which lead to lakeshore flooding and erosion at Lake Erie. And we have record high inflows of Lake Ontario into Lake Erie every single year. So that's just leading to massive problems. So there's quite some interest in getting models set up over that domain to see if we understand what's the driving forces behind that and how we could influence or like change those impacts. So that's when we decided to do Lake Erie. And then before we even started inviting people, we made a few key design decisions for the project. First and foremost, we wanted to use the same forcing data set, the same meteorological forcings for all the models. No other data set than the one we provided to basically have the main influence of model performance being fixed for everybody. That was the first thing. The second thing is that I wanted to have everything open source. I wanted to have set up a framework where it's super easy for new people to come in and say, I want to participate as well. And then they just basically, it's very clear where are the data, what are the rules, what to produce, and then they have a list of outputs basically they need to provide, and they could just like come, even in 5 years, they could come repeat that study and look where they are in that benchmark. Like basically we have like 20 models, they would add their model, they could see where they rank between those 20 models that have been already there. So a living database, that was something really important for all of us. And then the third one was that every single decision besides those would be made by consensus by all the collaborators in monthly meetings. So we set up monthly meetings, everybody agreed that they would participate on those meetings, and every decision we make, we would propose during those meetings, and it would be that we all together decide which way to go, which I think is the main point, that it's created so much trust between the people, like the collaborators. And the reason why we grew so much over time was that it was like easy to join because of that living open source benchmark framework. And also that we were like, everybody had the feeling to be part of the team. It wasn't a decision made and then they had to follow, but it was like a discussion and everybody agreed on something. So I think I'm really happy that that worked out so well. And then we just fast forward now 1.5 years. So we ended up, I think we started with 3 models in the beginning. We ended up with 17 models after about 2 years. We have 2 machine learning models set up over the domain. We have the large basin runoff model run by the US Army Corps. We have 2 different GeO4J setups. We have HiMod 2 in its distributed version. We have 2 SWAT setups. basically showing what's the human impact of like having the same model set up by two different groups that are not actually talking with each other. We have the mesoscale hydrologic model set up twice in two different calibration schemes. We have HYPE. We have two setups, different structures of BIC, one GRU and one the native tile setup. We have GEM-Hydro. We have two MESH setups, two different land surface schemes underlying MESH. And we have WATFLOOD. In total, that's 34 people that worked like basically 2 years on getting that done from different institutions in Canada, the US, and Europe. As I said, we agreed on one domain, Lake Erie, including Lake St. Clair. Everybody used the same forcing data set, which is an hourly data set, which is only 5 years long. I will come to that problem a little bit later. But we have 5 years of forcings, 15-kilometer gridded product, as you can see here in that left figure. So everybody had to use that data set, but of course, like different models need different constructs of forcings. So for example, there are some models that need lump forcings. So they were allowed to lump those forcings, but they were not allowed to use any other precipitation data set. That's what I mean with we use the same forcing. So every information about meteorology would come from that data set that of course you can post-process it. You can upscale it, regrid it, whatever. And we share everything on one platform, which is part of that. We want to have a living database and everything is open and accessible to everybody. So we do that on GitHub. The whole project management is done on GitHub. The 17 models are listed here. As I named them just a few seconds ago. We clustered them into 3 different groups. We have the machine learning models. We separated them because they are very different in how they are set up, which that kind of data they use, how they calibrate, validate, and all these things. Then we have the more classic hydrologic and land surface models that are either locally calibrated. We have, I think, 7 of them that are locally calibrated, which means if we have 20 stations where we want to compare the model, we basically have 20 sub-watersheds and we have 20 different model setups. So the model is calibrated at each individual station, which is a problem if you want to do spatial validation, then you have to transfer parameters and things like this. But that was a decision every modeler could do if they want to locally calibrate or globally calibrate. And then we have the third group of models where we have exactly one setup over the entire domain. So that's the globally calibrated entire setup over the whole domain. That's the calibration strategy, global or local. Temporal resolution is for most of the models, or for a lot of models, it's daily, because we are comparing to streamflow, and it was a daily streamflow measurement. So most of the models were running daily anyway, but some models were even running hourly. And some models actually run their land surface scheme at a 5-minute resolution. That's temporal. Spatial is a little bit more complicated because the spatial discretization of all these models is basically a modeling decision. So it was really tough to get that column filled with something. So I had to talk individually to every single person to get this filled in here. So a lot of people have subbasins. So they would set up different subbasins, or they have HRUs. A lot of models are gridded at different resolutions. Then we have also gridded with tiles. We have a model with GRUs, and the other ones here are all gridded. So just to give you an overview of what these models are, what are the differences, we have those 3 different groups. These 3 different groups will guide us or lead us through the rest of the results, basically. So I'm looking at the individual groups all the time. The project setup, I think I said most of that already. Common meteorological forcing, right? We used that RDRS data set. Everybody had to do that 15-kilometer hourly resolution. Looks like this for air temperature. But then besides meteorological forcings, we have other data we need to set up those models, and I call them geophysical data sets. It's the DEM, mostly soil and land cover. And in the GRIP-E project or for the Lake Erie, every modeler could pick which data set they wanted for that. We tried to unify that, but it was too much for the beginning of the project. We couldn't agree on anything. So then we wanted to attract also more people, more groups. So we said, like, let's leave that open and flexible for everybody. So just pick whatever you think you want to use or you have already used, take this, and we go from there. The other thing that was common was the output station. So we selected 46 calibration stations that everybody had to report model outputs for. 46 stations, I mean streamflow gauge stations, basically. So we had decided about this 46 stations right at the beginning of the project. And then much later into the project, we also decided on 7 validation stations, which was pretty good because nobody, including myself, didn't know where we are going to validate. So that was pretty good. But it leads to a few minor problems I will talk about later. So these 7 stations were just selected later. So we knew a lot of things already at that point. So our selection was a little bit biased there. And we will see that in the results actually. So that's where we started. We have 2 different objectives in that study. Those 46 stations are actually split into 2 groups. The first group is low human impact watersheds. So it's these gauge stations where everything upstream is basically unmanaged. And then we have objective number 2, that's the most downstream watershed. So it's the gauge stations that do not have a gauge station closer to the shore than the one we have. So it's all the downstream ones, and it's 31 of them are most downstream. Half, like about 1/3 is in Canada, 2/3 are in the US, and for the low human impact, it's about 50-50. The 7 stations we used for validation, there's only 1 in Canada and 6 in the US, but I don't think that's a major problem. But we used the same stations for both objectives. We didn't want to split them. So coming to the results now. So we have these different groups of models. We have our 2 objectives, and I will fill in the slide step by step. I just want to guide you because it's going to be a really busy slide. So I will just go step by step through it. So we start with the calibration results. We have 2 models here, the 2 machine learning models, and you can see 2 bars because the first bar is the performance, the median performance over all objective 1 stations. So like over all these 28 stations, and the second bar is the median NSE over these 31 stations. So objective 1, objective 2, objective 1, objective 2, and this valued up here just tells you what the median actually is. So what we can see is that the second machine learning model is actually way worse than the first one. For everybody who does not know NSE, NSE is optimal at 1, and everything below 1 is suboptimal. So we want to get as close to 1 as possible. So this model is way better. It's known, it's published that this method is very data hungry, so it needs much, much more data than this other method. That's why this performance kind of pattern was expected. That's the machine learning models. The second group of models are these locally calibrated models. So we had 7 of them. The SWAT EPA model, this one here where we only see 1 bar, they only contributed to 1 objective. They never did the second one, probably because like the performance wasn't that great. So they basically dropped out at that point. But all the other models have a pretty good performance. The best one, slightly best one, is the MHM model that was set up in Waterloo. Both objectives, we can't see any significant difference between the 2 objectives, which is kind of surprising because the first objective, the natural gauges or the natural watersheds, are supposed to be way easier to model than the ones that are most downstream with management and everything. So it was really surprising that these 2 objectives didn't perform different. But all the other models are kind of similar. to the performance. Maybe the SWAT 12 model is a little bit lower in performance than the others, but it's like reading a lot into those values than you probably should. And then we have the globally calibrated models, that's the other 8. So yes, a similar pattern, like there is no clear like difference. Sometimes objective 2 is better, sometimes objective 1 is better. There's no clear pattern behind the models. So I was expecting when we set it up that objective 1 would always be way better than objective 2, but that didn't happen. In the second group, it's definitely MHM that is winning. In this group, it's significantly better than the other models, which is surprising because MHM is the European model and the people who set up that model had never worked in that region before, while other models or other modelers have worked like tens of years in that domain already. Or the models were actually built for the Great Lakes, which is kind of surprising that they are not as good as MHM for different reasons, certainly. That's the calibration results. That's this 28 and 31 stations. And then we have validation. Same groups, machine learning, locally calibrated and globally calibrated models. We have 2 models which have these dashed lines here. It's LBRM and MESH class. You cannot actually look at those validation results because these models had used some of those validation stations already during calibration. So we have to put them aside. LBRM actually used all the calibrations, all the validation stations in calibration. So that's why their performance is so good because it's actually calibrated at them. But I just show them for completeness that they are not empty here. What we can see is machine learning models decrease significantly in validation, which is definitely a point because we force them how to calibrate their models, which is not like the traditional way machine learning models would be calibrated. And also the amount of data we provided is just known to be not enough to train properly a machine learning model. And then we have the locally calibrated models that decreased in performance. All of them decreased in performance, which is known. It's not surprising that a locally calibrated model, once you transfer parameters to basically ungauged stations, that you will lose performance, of course. And then we have the globally calibrated models, and they actually all improved in performance, which was quite surprising because we thought like they would stay at the same level. But here it's the problem, how we actually selected the validation stations. We had seen in the calibration that objective 1 and objective 2 is not really, they are not so different, right? So we looked into that and we trusted the tags that are given by the Water Survey Canada and the USGS to their stations. So there is a tag that says this station is managed or not, or the reservoir is managed or not, which is constant, like it's one tag over time. It never changes, it's one tag. So probably maybe a station was tagged as non-managed, but it maybe wasn't managed in the 70s when the tag was assigned, but now it is managed. So what we didn't do when we selected our calibration stations, we didn't actually look at hydrographs. We just picked the stations based on the tags. So that is basically the reason why they are not really different, because it's actually not objective 1 and objective 2. So the objective 1 is also, there's a lot of managed stations in between. So we learned that. And then when we selected our validation stations, we actually looked at hydrographs and discarded all stations that had super flashy hydrographs where you could see that there's a management actually happening in the hydrograph. So we discarded all them. So these 7 stations, the validation stations, are actually the really good behaving ones. And we are absolutely sure that this is the reason why validation performance is so much better than calibration performance for the global models, because it's just the easier stations. And then yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say about that slide. But as I said, like this is only like the performance is only the median over all stations. So if we now look at the performance at every single station, and here we are looking at calibration for objective number 2. And here you can see in every single line, it's the performance of a model. So like this is the models, and this is the objective 2 gauge stations. These values here are basically the values you have just seen in the slide before. But now you can see the performance of every model at every single gauge station. And the blue NSE values are good. So we want to see as much blue as possible in this heat map. So here we can see that this one machine learning model is just way better than the other one. We can also see that the second block here, the locally calibrated models, is way more blue than the other block, which is what we assume. It's just like every single model is calibrated at each individual station, so it should be more blue. And then we can see that MHM, the one that is set up by the UFZ in Germany, is just like the line that is the most blue across all the globally calibrated models. That's why its NSE value is just like so much better than all the others. But one interesting point we can see with the local globally calibrated models is this block of gauge stations that are just not performing good in any of the models. So we have this gauge station here, the first one, that is like deep red for all the models. And once we saw those results, so it's not a problem, it's obviously not a problem of the model. So we looked at the station, and I looked it up on Google Maps. So this station is located under a highway. It's basically all the precipitation that is falling onto the highway is redirected into the river that is just like flowing right under the bridge with the highway. And the gauge station is right after. So like just a few meters behind that relocated precipitation water from the highway. And that's why like the hydrograph looks horrible. Like it's super flashy. And it's just nothing a model has implemented. So that's the reason why all these models are basically really suffering at that station, unless you calibrate to exactly that flashy hydrograph and only that flashy hydrograph, then you might be able to capture it. All the other stations that are also deep red here are all located in urban areas. So we looked them up where they are. They are mostly located in Metro Detroit area, where you have a lot of urban hydrology, which is a problem in all the models because most of them don't have a really sophisticated urban hydrology module in there. So that might be a reason why they are all suffering there. But it's good to see that pattern across a lot of models. Now, if we pick, so this is now all the models at all the stations. If we now finally look at some hydrographs, so we pick one of the stations, so like one of those columns here, and look at the hydrographs for that station. So that's a validation station. So this is basically the hydrographs of the 2 machine learning models, the 7 locally calibrated models, and the 8 globally calibrated models. And it's just like, it's 8 hydrographs, 8 blue hydrographs here. And the value I report here is the median NSE. So like the median over these 8 NSE values I get for this group of models. Interesting, if we don't take the median of the NSEs, but we derive first the mean hydrograph and then look at the performance of the mean hydrograph, we improve in all cases. Like no matter which gauge station we look at, if we look in validation or calibration, it doesn't matter. We are always improving our performance when we actually take the mean hydrograph, which is the reason why people set up multi-model ensembles, because this is just like you have independent models, they have different strengths and weaknesses, and they average out once you take like the mean over all the model outputs. So this was a good, it's nothing new, but it was really good to see that happening here. And it's really nice to see like this really significant improvements you can achieve with like taking the multi-model ensemble. So it's worth the work of setting up so many models. Just a summary of like, that's all the results of GRIB-E we have produced. Globally calibrated setups are really good in spatial validation. The local ones lose performance in validation, which is something you would expect. MHM contributed to both groups, locally and globally calibrated. They win in both groups and have superior NSE performance there. Most of the globally calibrated models have problems in urban areas, which might lead to like more improvements. So like it's just a signal that we should improve those parts in our models. And that this last slide was that multi-model ensembles significantly improve the performance of models. So that's where we finished GRIB-E. That's our main outcomes. But we saw over the course of this whole project, we saw a few issues. The first and foremost is that our forcing period is so short. It was only 5 years. We had to do 1 year of warm-up. So we basically were left with 4 years of model simulations. So we couldn't do any temporal validation, which is kind of like what you do in hydrology first. So we didn't have data for that. So that's a problem. We also we were too naive in the beginning, I think, when we selected stations for our low human impacts watersheds. We should have looked at all the individual hydrographs. We should have looked where they are located, if there's really no dam upstream. So this biased our validation results, probably. Then we use these various geophysical data sets like land cover, soil, and so on. And that's certainly a reason that we see differences in model performance. Just a model is better because it just used a better data set or a newer data set or aggregated better or whatever. So it's just a reason. It's not the model itself. It could just be the data you're using to set up your model that is making the difference. And one point is that we only analyze streamflow here. So we just wanted to be inclusive, and streamflow is just what all these models produce. So it was just the easiest to start with streamflow, but certainly we also should have looked at different output variables. So this is like basically the 4 main points which made it into considerations for Great Lakes. And so we changed setups for the Great Lakes. It's still kind of the same, but these 4 aspects are going to change for the Great Lakes study, which I will talk about now. So the team is slightly different. It's similar but different. So like a lot of people are still bearing with me and want to run also want to participate in the Great Lakes study. Machine learning models again, different lumped models, HMETS, MESH is already on board, WATFLOOD, WIC. We have NOAA MP new, MHM is on board again, HIMOD. It's a few new people and a couple of old people, like from the previous study. I'm really happy that we have already 15 models that said yes. And we already started like with our monthly meetings, making decisions of what we need to decide before we can actually start with anything. Decided on the domain, which is always like a lot of discussion. So we not only do the Great Lakes, but we included also the Ottawa River, which is highly managed, and we wanted to keep, or we wanted to do that challenge and just like use highly managed areas to see how we can do there. We don't use the St. Lawrence portion of it because it would have made everything just like way too large. The 2 objectives again, objective 1 and objective 2, but as I said, it took us several months to find those stations because we really looked into the details this time. We are currently in the calibration phase. We have a new data set, which is longer. We will do 10 years of calibration again regarding streamflow, but we also will have enough data for temporal validation, 8 years, and 7 years in this case. We saved also stations for spatial validation, which is the next phase. And then in phase 4, we are going to do model evaluation, where we are going to evaluate all the models regarding additional variables like snowpack, soil moisture, and evapotranspiration for the different periods of time and for the different stations, so validation and calibration stations. And then we save a lot of ideas for phase 5. So the first 4 phases are basically inclusive for a lot of models. I want as many models to do as many phases as possible. So we save all the ideas that might exclude a lot of models in phase 5, just like where it comes really to the interesting research things, like, for example, calibrating models to those additional variables, not only using them for evaluation, but also calibrating against them, comparing daily and hourly stream flow, testing different precipitation data sets, all these fancy things you can do once you have all these model setups. So we save that for phase 5. As I said, the phases, we have 10 years of calibration, we have 7 years of temporal validation. We saved 1/3 of our stations for spatial validation, and we do 2/3 of the stations in calibration. And evaluation will then be over the entire time and the entire set of stations. They are distributed all over the domain. The participants, like, it's only me and one other person who knows actually which are the spatial validation stations. We do blind validation. Nobody knows anything. Everybody knows this figure, and probably they could go online and find which station this is, but I hope they don't do. So but the station numbers and everything is not shared yet. One major outcome of GRIP E is that we, at the end of the project, agreed on a common data set. So that's what I said, like, when we do consensus decisions in the project, this was one of the major ones, where I listed all DEMs or DEM data sets that had been used in GRIP E. And we discussed which one is the best of the 3, or it doesn't matter, or whatever. So we came up with one DEM that everybody agreed on and would use for any further study. So it's the HydroSheds DEM we agreed on. We agreed on one for soil, which is the global soil data set for Earth system models. It's a 1 kilometer data set. And we have the land cover data set, NA LCMS. Important for those data sets for us was that they are open source. And they are available over whole North America. That was the important thing, because we didn't want to have a data set that's only available for Canada, because we are covering the US as well. So that's one major outcome. And this is what everybody in GRIP GL has to use. There is no other soil data set anymore. The same for the meteorological forcings. It's the same one. It's RDRS, but version 2. It's a 10 kilometer data set, which has been prepared for the project. We shared already the first 11 years of that data set and kept back the last 7 years for validation. Nobody has ever seen those data. And we will do validation with them. One other common thing is that we propose a common routing tool or routing product for the entire project. That could route distributed runoff and recharge or total runoff. We held a workshop a few weeks ago where we introduced that routing product to all the collaborators, told them how to use it. We were running examples. We discussed how they could couple their specific model with their specific needs to this routing product. The good thing with that routing product, you can see in that figure here, it's covering the entire Great Lakes. The dark areas here are the areas of the calibration basins, basically. So basically everybody would route within those domains. The good thing with that routing product is that it's explicitly representing 214 lakes in this whole dark colored setup. So the modelers, or like the model, does not need to take care of that anymore. So there are some models where it's really tedious and like to include manually individual lakes. So nobody is usually doing that, only the large ones. But we have all the lakes that are larger than 5 square kilometers included in that routing product by default. So nobody would have to do that. And I'm really happy that the partners are so open to testing this. So the majority of the people that are in the group have signed up and said like, yeah, we are going to use that routing product. So we canceled out flexibility in forcing, geophysical data sets, and routing. So whatever difference we see in model outputs can now really attribute it to the land surface portion of the model, right? So nothing else anymore. It's not a data problem or not a difference that is from the data. I'm really happy that we agreed on so many different things. Yeah, just if you're wondering why you would include lakes here, there's quite some lakes in those regions, and with the routing product, you can include them to a different degree and with different kind of details. The routing itself runs through the Raven routing, the Raven model, which is run in only routing mode. So all the hydrologic components of Raven are switched off, and it's really only the routing portion. You can have different kinds of in-channel routing. We proposed using diffusive wave, but you can pick other ones. You can also include reservoir information in this routing tool. Like by default, we don't include anything, but you have the possibility of including it. It's you can calibrate in the framework, or like in the setup we provide, you can calibrate Manning's N and crest width. You can include these management rules, and model outputs need to be provided in that CDF format. And then there is like a tool how to convert your discretization of your model into how it is discretized in the routing. And we teach basically all our collaborators how to do that. So we're really happy that this is happening. And then we have already some preliminary results for the Great Lakes. Like that's the models I am setting up and running. And for me, it's always like basically just testing that all the data are correct, that there's no major issue in the data, that they're all formatted the same, and that there's not like lots of missing data in there and things like that. So just 3 pretty simple lumped models that are you can calibrate them overnight basically. And the results are looking already pretty good. So we are basically now waiting for the other model results coming in, and it's probably going to take until February or so before we have all the different calibration results for all the other 12 models. Yeah, and then we will continue to validation. So we will release more information that everybody can do validation, spatial and temporal. So this is basically, that's objective number 2. So I'm really happy to see that we don't have like this block of gauge stations that is not working in any of the models. We don't see that with our setup here. So there's only one model that had trouble for one station, for some stations here. But as soon as you go to more complex models, they disappear. So I'm pretty, so I hope that there will be not like something significantly wrong with those stations we have selected. Yeah, and then that's only like that we want. So what I have shown is streamflow. We will also evaluate our models against like additional variables. We already have like a set of observations we might use, but it's just, we will have to see. It's some candidates, we might not use all of them for validation or evaluation of model performance. We have to see if that works, but that's our list of candidates so far. We have a few for soil moisture, a few for evapotranspiration, and a few for snow depth. And then we have to come up with metrics how to evaluate model performance for those variables. So this is still ongoing, and there's certainly a lot of discussions coming up once we are at that stage of the model intercomparison, but that's already what we have. And I want to finish actually with this slide, just listing the current team of GRIP-GL, and it's the right time in case you're interested in that model intercomparison study. If you find it interesting, you would like to test this common routing, and like you're open to use the common data sets we have agreed on, you're very welcome to reach out to me. And if you have a model that is not on the list yet, just reach out to me, email me. We are open for new collaborators. Yeah, and with that, I would like to finish and would like to answer the questions you might have. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Julie. It's so exciting to hear about this in like a full-length presentation, because we always try to crush people into like 15, 20 minutes. So I'm glad to hear all of the details. We do have a few questions here. I'll start with them in the order I have received them. So the first one I got was from Pravin, and he has asked, you mentioned that there is human influence in modeling results, such as model performance depends on a modeler's expertise to some degree. My question is, how did you address this in this particular study?
For GRIP-E, we were really open, and I like that we had several groups setting up the same model, but it's really hard to discuss in a paper later why it's like it was the problem of the SWAT model. Like it was set up by the EPA first, by US EPA, and the model performance was just like really bad. And then the University of Guelph, they joined and they set up SWAT, kind of same data sets and everything, and they were like way better. So you just address that by saying, well, you know, it's just a different expertise. Like maybe like the EPA model was also set up for different purposes. They didn't set up this model for this study. They set up this model for something they wanted to achieve, and it was over this domain by coincidence. So they just basically gave us their results. So it was easy for them. But it's just like, it's nothing you can really address. It's basically, you have to mention it. You have to say, well, it's expertise of the modeler. Of course, if you set up your model in one day, might not be as good as if you spend a year on setting it up, right? But it's a common issue. It's addressed in or it's mentioned in a lot of publications, but there's just nothing you can do about it besides documenting exactly what you have done. And we are trying this in this project. So like everybody who's contributing has to fill out like a pretty extensive Excel sheet of all the modeling decisions they have to make. Like, how do they aggregate soil? How do they aggregate land cover? What do they actually do with the land cover? Do they reclassify? Soil comes as texture. Do they use textures or do they use classes? When they use classes, which classification do they use? And so on. So we try to document as much as possible, and we try to nail down what might be the reason for like the two different models working differently. But it is so hard because there's so many differences, like so many decisions you have to make, that it's impossible to boil it down to exactly this one decision you made. It's because you use that other soil data set. And that's the reason why it's not working. It's just like so much I can do, because it really depends. Like these two groups would have to talk to each other and would have to figure out what is actually the reason for the different, like the different performance.
Right.
So,
yeah, and you already put a ton of effort into wrangling everyone together. There's so many models and so many collaborators, so it would be.
Exactly, and that's definitely the reason behind the fact that in GRIP-GL, we are only allowing for models that are different. Like it must be a different model. And if it is the same model, like for example, you see in the list blended and blended, it's the same model, but one is lumped and one is semi-distributed. So it's basically using exactly everything exactly the same, but one is lumped and one is semi-distributed. So basically, if they are different, you can boil it down to exactly this one difference between them. We have also like NOAA MP here, NOAA MP, like WRF-Hydro has NOAA MP underlying. So this model is going to use like the standard WRF-Hydro routing, while this NOAA MP setup is going to use the Raven routing. But besides that, these two models are set up exactly in the same way. Like there is nothing different. Like they share the same setup files and everything. The only difference is the routing. So if they are different, it's going to be the routing. And that's what we enforce in GripGL. We were much more open in Lake Erie. And it was so hard to write a paper or like to bring everything together in the end that we decided that we are not going to allow for that in GripGL anymore.
Okay. We had a couple questions from Christopher Wellen, but I believe Brian has answered them. Brian, did you want to add anything to the answers that you had answered live during the actual presentation? He had asked about the weighing the models by skill or just averaging them all. Or plans to expand the temporal window, which Julie did touch on once we got to the Great Lakes portion.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. I mean, the trick with the expanding the temporal window is making sure we have the right resolution and the right variables available for the meteorology stuff. So we have that with the new product version 2. So yeah, I'll just leave it like at that.
Okay, perfect. Well, we have more. Those answers are good, he says. So great. We'll move on to Diana's question. Thanks for your great talk, Julie. Just so you know, Julie, that was a message for you. The question is, was there a specific calibration routine everybody has to follow apart from the objective function and time period? For example, specific optimization algorithm, maximum number of evaluations, etc.
No, we didn't enforce anything there. And actually, we also didn't enforce the objective function. Everybody could use whatever they wanted. They knew how I'm going to evaluate the models. They knew that I'm going to do NSE of streamflow. But if a modeler decided, but I know that NSE is not enough, I need to also calibrate whatever in my model, that it works better because the model needs that information, they were open to do so. And that's also what we are going to do in GripGL. We will switch to KGE for GripGL, but we are not enforcing budget or calibration algorithm or something, because these models are too diverse to enforce that, because like the run times are so different. Like the GR4J, like I can calibrate them all together overnight, while Hydro probably takes like 2 months to calibrate.
Great.
So that's why we didn't want to enforce that. And also we should leave it a little bit to the modeler, how much patience and also which kind of resources they have. There's people who not even have like a compute cluster. They run everything on their local computer. So yeah.
Trade-offs, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Pravin has asked another question, but I'm going to skip to this other question just because Pravin has already got a question. So I'll come back to his. And this question is a bit controversial, so we'll see how you want to engage with it, Julie. But it is, model comparisons have been used historically to assess the quote-unquote best performing model, but current literature rejects such direct comparisons and recommends moving to a paradigm of a model ecosystem where each model, despite its limits, has its own niche. What are your thoughts on this?
I think that's exactly where we are. Like, I totally agree with that. I don't think that there will be one model that rules them all. It's just like these models have been developed also for, like, that's what I try to make that point in the beginning. They have been developed for certain aspects. Like there's models that are really, really good in the mountains, right? While other models are way better in the prairies. And I don't think that you want to build a model that is working everywhere, because it's going to be such a monster. It's So it's not being able, like nobody's going to be able to set it up properly anymore, to calibrate it properly. So I'm guessing that, I think it's the way better way to go, to leave some flexibilities in the model, to have different models for different purposes, to have like an ecosystem of models. I think that's like a perfect word for that. To know, but right now I think in this, sometimes you just not even know which model is good where. Like that's the whole problem, like that there are so many models out there, they are all so complex, you lost track of where they are actually good at. So I think that's what we try to contribute here, to show like they're all not too different, or like this model is way better than that one in this domain or in this region or for those stations or whatever. Yeah, we never wanted to really like make one model winning, or like that's why I always like try to quote this model is the best, because it's not about that. It's just like it was MHM because it is just like it is using something that no other model internally, that no other model is using. It has a parameter regionalization in there, which seems to work out of the box so well. Like MHM was set up, not even calibrated, and they already, with their default setup, they outperformed half of the models. And they hadn't like even worked in this domain before. So there must be some knowledge in that construct, or like this feature of the model, that other people might want to learn about. Right. So I think it's more about this, learning from others, right? Like that's working good, let's try that.Maybe it's working good for us as well, maybe not, but we have to try. So
great. We have 2 more questions I'm going to try to slip in here at the very end of this. We're running over the hour. So one was, are you going to use these models for any sort of climate change assessment work?
Probably, you could probably use them. I mean, they like all the model setups. I'm not sure if you're going to share all the model setups, but the models are going to be set up over that domain, right? And we are trying to cover like a longer time period now, since we have a longer forcing data set now. So you could certainly do climate runs with them. Like if you just have a climate forcing, you could really run those models with like the climate projections.
Okay.
We haven't planned that, but it's like phase 5. Let's do all the things we always wanted to try. But we are not there yet. Like we have to do the boring stuff first, right? Like to get our baseline, all the model setups and all these things before we can come to the fun stuff. And that's certainly something that would be on the fun side to try.
Right. Totally get it. I am a manager myself, so I get the importance of doing that, the administrative work. I'll end on this question. It's from Lewis, and it is, any idea how to address eWood's Grand Challenge models for everywhere? Question mark. Maybe you don't know what the Grand...
Which kind of model? Yeah, exactly. I don't know.
That's literally the question. Maybe there could be a explanation in the chat. I am not familiar with this particular Grand Challenge. I wonder if Brian is.
I don't see I can't see the questions myself because I'm like sharing, and maybe I just stop sharing.